give out their young girls out in marriage should be able to get dowry, which is the money that is given when a girl is being given out in marriage for them to sustain the family. So we now see the violation of rights of women, the violation of rights of girls, increased sexual violence, which could be both by the militants and also is also fighting. And we know that any society that is militarized, highly militarized, there's a gross violation of women's rights. Because women still have to bear the burden of going out to fetch firewood. They have to bear the burden of going out to fetch water. They still have to go out and look for food for the family. Even if it's where they're giving food aid, it's the women that have to go out and get this thing. And in the process of going to get this, most of them are waylaid and raped serially. And some of them unwillingly trade sex to get food, which they would ordinarily have done if it were not conflict situation. There's also an increased burden of caregiving for women. They have to look after the sick and wounded that comes back home. They have to take care of the family. They have to fend for themselves. They still have to undergo the process of even looking after themselves so that they are not violated. So it's an increased burden women face in this situation. Now, what is the role or what is the intersection between disarmament and food security in Africa? We've talked about the impact of conflict in the region. What has this got to do with disarmament and what has it got to do with food security in Africa? I would like to first of all start by defining food security. According to the World Food Summit of 1996, we define food security as existing when people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life. I know that food security has become a global issue. It also has become a grave importance in our designated this year, 2014, as a year of increasing food security and securing agricultural practices in Africa. Let's also look at the gendered aspects of food security. What are the gendered aspects of food security? The gendered aspect of food security in Africa is visible along three pillars of food security. The first one is availability. When we talk about availability of food, we mean that there should be sufficient quantities of food available, not just being available, but it has to be consistently available. Now, during conflict, I initially talked about loss of livelihood, which is agriculture. So that means that it is not possible for these women to have sufficient quantity of food available on a consistent basis. What about access to the primary productive asset, which is land? Women's ability to own or inherit land is further endangered during conflict. Women own less than 3% of the land in Africa, even though they contribute to 60% of production in the region. The conflict situation in Africa has also further worsened the food crisis in the region. Most women are displaced during armed conflict, causing them to lose their source of livelihood, thereby making them not to have stability in order to procure or produce food, which can be hampered by the conflict or also by natural disaster, amongst other things. We would now say, what is the relevance of disarmament to conflict? It's a well-known fact that the proliferation of arms further heightens the tension in the region and escalates conflict in the region. Because of the easy access to arms in the region, and I said initially that it is estimated that we have over 100 million illicit arms in the region. And that is why we're seeing a lot of emerging crises in this region. What is now the influence of armed conflict on food security? We have food crisis. Even though it's a global situation, but in Africa it is worse. There's a lot of food crisis going on, especially with the increase in emerging conflicts in the region. There's a whole lot of displacement. Women constitute over 80% of displaced individuals in this region. There's also loss of source of livelihood, and the conflict affects the production, storage, and distribution of food in the region. When there's an ongoing conflict, there's a whole lot of insecurity. Women are not spared. They are also prone to a lot of sexual violations. So most times they're afraid, even when they're still in their communal land, they're afraid to go out to farm. They can't even, because the situation and the environment is not conducive for them to even engage in their productive activities, which means that they cannot even store the food. Because what we've seen during conflict, that most times the militants would even go to the storage barns of these women and commanded them to give them this food while raping them at the same time. It also affects distribution. If you cannot produce adequate food, if you cannot store it, then you cannot distribute. Women cannot have access to it. They cannot even have an exchange. They cannot even go to the market to sell. People cannot go to the market to buy because the market is not existent at that point in time. So we have seen that arms play a critical role in conflict, and it importantly affects food security in the region. And that is why we are calling for an urgent arms control in the region, which is why we are calling Disarmament. And as an organization, we work and we lobby and push for complete and total disarmament in the region. Now, when we talk about disarmament, what do we mean by disarmament? In simple terms, disarmament is the act of reducing, limiting, or absolutely abolishing weapons. This also includes conventional arms. The proliferation of arms in Africa has very far-reaching consequences for women, peace, and security agenda in the region. We cannot divorce women, peace, and security agenda from disarmament issues. We all have to look at it simultaneously within a human rights framework, because it is the women's right to have peace, to be safe, to have complete, comprehensive human security. And this is said by the escalating proliferation of arms in the region. So it has become very critical for us to monitor and regulate the production, transfer, and use of arms globally. Hence, the push and advocacy for the Arms Trade Treaty. This Arms Trade Treaty is a very valuable treaty, especially for the African region, because of the gender dimensions which is contained in the main body of the treaty. Now, what is the Arms Trade Treaty? The Arms Trade Treaty is the first treaty that regulates the international transfer of conventional arms and ammunition, and was adopted by the United Nations in 2013, which is just last year. The ARMS are some of the binding principles of ATT. When I talk about ATT, I mean Arms Trade Treaty. One of the aims of Arms Trade Treaty is to regulate the flow of weapons around the world by requiring governments to assess all arms transfer against a set of criteria relating to misuse before the transfer of arms is either authorized or denied. And this is very, very important, because this requires that in assessing this risk, the state also assess other specific risks before approving an arms transfer. And some of these risks would include: would the transfer undermine peace and security? Would it be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international human rights or humanitarian law? Or would it be used to commit acts of terrorism or transnational crimes? And as we all know, that many acts of gender-based violence constitute violation of international humanitarian law and human rights, which makes this treaty very critical and very important. And when we talk about gender-based violence, it is extremely important that in issues of disarmament, this is critically addressed. Because arms in over 60-70% of the sexual exploitation of women committed in the region, arms have been found to be used in these cases. Because it is not easy for some men, for a man to come in and rape a woman in the presence of her whole family, or in the presence of some community watching, if he is not armed. So he uses the arms to create an act of barrier, people to arrest him or to stop him from committing such violence. Men, especially in Africa, talk about why don't you resist if because you want it. But there is no how you can resist an armed man. Because if any act of trying to resist or any act of resistance we met with stiff opposition using the arms on you, which will be met with the woman's death. So this is another critical thing that the Arms Trade Treaty has been able to look into, which is a very welcome innovation, a welcome point we've seen with the Arms Trade Treaty. And the Arms Trade Treaty, in Article 7, Paragraph 4, makes an explicit reference to gender-based violence, making it the first global legally binding treaty to make reference to gender-based violence within the main body of the treaty. Now, what we have seen with other treaties or with other conventions is just making reference to gender-based violence. But due to the pushing, the advocacy and lobbying of women organizations, this has made the Arms Trade Treaty to contain very strong language on gender-based violence. And I would like to pause here and talk a little bit about WILPF's role in making this happen. WILPF had a public open call to join our campaign because we realized that it was not enough to make just reference gender-based violence and arms as contributing to an increase in gender-based violence. But it was very important that this legally binding document have strong language on gender-based violence and also recognize the role that arms contribute to gender-based violence. And so that is why we say the ATT includes mechanisms for preventing gender-based violence. Because inadvertently, when you control the transfer of arms and you look at it, that if there's a risk that these arms will be used in committing violence against women, it will be used in sexually exploiting women, it will also be used to increasing or escalating violence in the region, then a transfer would not be authorized. Then you see that the ATT is a very powerful tool. And also, it places a burden not on just those that are buying the arms, but also the countries that are also producing the arms. So it's a two-way thing. And then it has now become the international community to look at that, see, we have a set of criteria which we must measure. And this is very important for us in the African region because with the increase in emerging conflicts we've seen in the region, we've also seen an increase in gender-based violence. So the ATT is a very welcome tool for us to use in our advocacy, for us to use in our work on ground to push for zero tolerance on gender-based violence in the region. I would also like to take a look at Nigeria in particular. What is the Women, Peace and Security agenda in Nigeria? What has WILPF been doing around women, peace and security in Nigeria? What is the development situation in Nigeria? For those of us that are not familiar with the country Nigeria, there be over 8 million people, of which women constitute 40% of the population, as at the last census we had in 2006. Nigeria launched its National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security last year, August 2013. And we are the first country to have our National Action Plan process driven by the government, which has its own plus and disadvantages as well. Nigeria as a country has all the characteristics of all the types of conflicts found in Africa, as we had earlier discussed. Even we're the first African country to ratify the Armed Treaty. What does this mean for the WILPF Peace and Security agenda in Nigeria? Nigeria is surrounded by countries that are in ongoing conflict, surrounded by countries that have come out of conflict, post-conflict, and Nigeria itself, I would say, is a post-conflict country, is a pre-conflict country, and it's also a conflict country because we have conflict going on in some parts of the country, especially in the northern part of Nigeria. But as a whole, Nigeria came out of the Civil War, the 1966-1967 Biafran Civil War, and also with the indicators going on in Nigeria, it's also a pre-conflict situation. And we have seen a proliferation women-focused group who are actively working and advocating and pushing for the full implementation of WILPF Peace and Security agenda in the country. I would like to talk about and emphasize on the role which Nigeria has played in the WILPF Peace and Security agenda in Nigeria. Which Nigeria has played great role in the WILPF Peace and Security agenda by using the resolution 1325 as a framework for the work we do on ground, which in addition, we also work with FIDO. The UNCR 1325, like I said earlier on, is a very historical resolution because it is the first time that women's role as invaluable peace actors are acknowledged. And it also places a burden on the state to secure women during conflict and after conflict, to ensure that women's rights are not violated. So it's actually a very important tool and document for us to use in holding our government accountable to ensuring that women peace and security agenda in the country is implemented. And so for us, as WILPF Nigeria, we have advocated to have a national action plan on women peace and security agenda. So we were so happy and excited that we launched our national action plan last year, and WILPF Nigeria played a very crucial role during the consultation that took place in the zones and also during the launch of the national action plan. We have also gone further to localize national action plan in the different geopolitical zones where we work. How have we been able to do this? We have created awareness by holding seminars, by running trainings. We've run a lot of trainings at the community level for women, community leaders, critical stakeholders in the community as well. We've also tried to work in pushing and lobbying that women should be included in the peace processes. And then when we talk about peace processes, that's when I talk about localization and contextualization, because it has to be in the context. So for us in the context, it means having women partake in the political process and the decision-making process. So what we've done is to talk with, we've had a different set of programs for different actors who we've identified are very critical to the implementation of women peace and security agenda in the country. First, for the implementing actors or ministries, we've run training on the importance of gender mainstreaming in their ministry. We've also talked about the importance of working with a gender-focused policy, whatever programs or policies that is coming out from the ministry. And this has created a lot of awareness, but we still have a whole lot of work to do. But I'm very happy that the awareness is increasing because we are also partnering with other women-focused organizations to make this happen. On the women's level as well, we found that women do not engage in formal peace processes in the country. Rather, they engage more in informal organizations such as civil society organizations, women-focused groups, faith-based organizations. So we have leveraged on this to educate and create awareness on the importance of 1325, and how they can effectively use it in engaging in the work they do on the ground and nationally as well. This has created a lot of impact in awareness of women on their rights. This has also created a lot of movement in the direction of women's implementation of the peace and security agenda. We've now seen more women groups now localizing women peace and security agenda and with whatever work they are doing on ground. And like Barbara said initially when she was Ima said when she was making introduction, it's very important to have a comprehensive outlook on the women peace and security agenda without divorcing it from human rights or from disarmament issues, knowing that all this make the body of having sustainable peace in the region or in a country. Now, what are some of the challenges we have seen on the ground? The patriarchal society in which we live in Nigeria has been a major hindrance, and change comes but is very slow. There has to be a cultural reorientation. There has to be lots of awareness raising, lots of awareness creation, which we have done by using information materials and some IEC materials, that is informative educative communication materials, like some banners, posters, flyers, pamphlets, which tend to simplify what we mean by women's engagement in the women peace and security agenda, which also tends to identify entry points for individuals, for organizations to agenda. We try to promote the culture of Pan-Africanism because by promoting Pan-Africanism, we're also promoting our identity and our culture, using the positive elements of the culture while discarding the negative aspects of the culture. Because some of the challenges that have been brought up is culture is they are. So by working with the positives of the culture, looking at what role peace in the communities. We found out that in most communities in Nigeria, even though we have a whole lot of ethnic groups, but there is something central that women used to play great role in ensuring peace in the community, even though these roles played by women were not acknowledged. So the processes we try to put in place is reinventing those good cultural practices where women used to be the peacekeepers in the community, but this time making sure that acknowledgement is given and it is being integrated into the formal peace process in the community. Low economic empowerment is also one of the major challenges of the women peace and security agenda in the region. And so for wherever community we work, when we do go to the grassroots of the community to work, we always need to tie economic empowerment and skill acquisition training to the work we do on ground. This is to ensure sustainability of the process and ownership by the community women. Because the truth is that women are still grappling with bread and butter issues. And while battling with bread and butter issues, it's very difficult to look beyond the self and start looking at the community and their role in the community and how they can play and safeguard their rights as women. So by ensuring that they are economically viable, they are financially independent, you're now empowering the women to be confident, financially independent, and able to speak out. And not only speaking out, she's also able to create opportunities for other women, employ other women, create processes that will have other women engage in the women peace and security agenda at the community level. So it's creating various entry points for women to engage in these issues. And that is why for us in WILPF, we have seen that it is very important not just to create awareness, but to also push to have women at the decision-making table. Because if you're not at the decision-making table, where decisions are being taken as to policies, as to programs that will affect your life, invariably you lose out. So we've pushed and lobbied to have women at the decision-making table, to be part of political processes, and we have a project called this in 2015 is to create awareness on women's political participation in the country, especially with our upcoming elections in the upcoming elections next by 2015. And this brings me to governance issues and disarmament in the region. Now, how has proliferation affected women's participation in decision making, in leadership positions, in political processes in the country? There's a whole lot of violence. There's a whole lot of conflict going on. And this has hindered the substantive participation of women in the process. Because women are scared of their lives. They are scared of being sexually violated. If not them, their daughters. So they are also so scared of this. They're trying to safeguard their families, which makes them very reluctant to come out. And one interesting thing about Nigeria is that we are also a producer of arms. We have an industry that produces local ammunition and arms. So which has made conflicts, communal conflicts to thrive, which has made religious-based violence to thrive. And the conflicts we see and the pockets of violence we see in Nigeria is as a result of proliferation of arms in the country and the lack of proper arms control in the country. And that is why for us, we welcomed the ratification of the Arms Trade Treaty by the Nigerian government, but we are lobbying that it should go beyond just ratifying the Arms Trade Treaty to substantive implementation of this treaty on the ground. And one of our recommendations is that we have a National Commission on Small Arms, which has actually undergone the first reading in the National House of Parliament, but failed the second reading. So we're still pushing and lobbying for this to see the reality of life and become fully implemented in the country. Because this will not ensure that there will be complete zero tolerance of violence against women in the country. We know that in Nigeria, in the northern part of Nigeria, we're seeing a whole lot of conflict and violence, which has different dimensions: ethnic conflict, religious dimension, political dimension as well. And this conflict is being fueled by the easy and readily availability of arms in that region. And this is one thing ATT, the Arms Trade Treaty, will go a long way in stemming the proliferation of arms in that region. Because when governments know that they are accountable to the transfer of arms to Nigeria, and then Nigeria also knows that it also is accountable to the arms it receives, and it has to ensure that these arms are not used to commit violation against human rights, are not used to escalate violence in the region, are not used to commit gender-based violence, then they will take proper care and we can now hold them accountable. So for women rights activists in the region, this is one tool we can use to push and hold our government accountable. So for WILPF Nigeria, this is a major thing we are going for, is a major tool we're using and working, and we are also not working alone. We have lots of sister organizations that are working in the country on this. And I must say that Nigeria has witnessed a lot of women, the growth of women focused organizations who are pushing for the full implementation of women peace and security in the country. And this is very important in the sense that with all the patriarchal society, the cultural practices, the low economic empowerment, having few women in decision-making processes and political processes, with the governance issue we have in the country, for us, we still see this as windows of opportunities for us to actively engage in the process. So instead of seeing it just as a challenge, we're also seeing it as an opportunity to create historic structure, to create lasting structure that will ensure that women's peace and security agenda is fully implemented in the country, that we hold our governments accountable using ratified treaties, using all the enumerated resolutions that form the women's peace and security agenda. For us, is a big thing because now we're not just working. We are working within a normative framework. We are working with resolutions that we can use to hold ourselves accountable. And so this is it. It is very binding. You have no option than to ensure the implementation of women's peace and security agenda in Nigeria, than to ensure that women's rights are upheld and are protected in times of conflict. So this is a very great opportunity, and we're actively engaging with the process, and we have great hope. Looking back and seeing what we've achieved over the years, not just as an organization, but as women activists and peace activists in Nigeria, we're very optimistic that the African region and Nigeria, that we're going to see a lot of goodwill being exhibited in the country and in the region, especially with the post-2015 agenda that's an ongoing discussion. It also provides an avenue for us as women to have a common position and a common voice, for us to call for all the protocols that have been ratified even in the African region. We talk about the Maputo Declaration, we talk about the African Charter for Women's and Human Rights, that we call for all this to be fully implemented, because we do not lack resolutions, we do not lack conventions in the region, but all we lack is the full implementation of all this. And so this is what we are pushing for in the region. So as feminists in Africa and as a Nigerian feminist, disarmament is of great importance, because if we are to ensure zero tolerance of violence against women, if we are to ensure zero tolerance against on gender-based violence in the region and in Nigeria, then we have to push for disarmament issue. We have to lobby. We have to ensure that the Arms Trade Treaty and Resolution 1325 is attended other resolutions are fully implemented in Nigeria and in Africa. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Joy. That was incredibly informative and well, very inspiring. So thank you very much, Joy. We will now open the floor for questions or comments. So the way to ask a question is to push the little hand icon on your GoToWebinar control panel. It should be there somewhere on your left. So if you have a question, just press the button and I will able to see your hand, and then I can give you the floor, and I will let you know if I give you the floor. So we have one question from Dixie Hairston. So Dixie, I'm going to give you the floor. You're unmuted. Go ahead. It looks like we just lost Dixie. She just disappeared. Let's see, did she go somewhere? I think she just got lost. So is there anybody else with a question right now for Joy? Joy, maybe I should start off. I have a question for you.
Okay.
You mentioned all the challenges that you were facing as Nigerian feminists, as African feminists, especially the patriarchal society was one that seemed very daunting to me. And I was wondering where you get your support from. I'm just thinking of a situation that I'm more familiar with in the West, and I would think that there are lots of groups and governments and people who would support work like this in the West. But so I'm wondering, who does WILPF Nigeria, and who do you get support from to do this work in Nigeria?
The work we've been doing so far, we've gotten our funding primarily from WILPF Sweden. We've also gotten our funding from WILPF International. And then we also have a grant we got last year from Oxfam Novib.
Great.
So these are the people who've probably gotten support to do the work we're doing. And then we also have individuals and groups, private individuals that have seen the work we're doing and would want to support in one way or the other. Sometimes not financially, but by giving time, by giving support, by mobilizing for us. So these are all some of the support we get on the ground.
Okay, great, thanks. In the meantime, we do have some questions. I'm going to give the floor to Adelia, and then Carlin, and then Helen Kay. If people could introduce themselves if they want, that would be great, so everyone knows who's in the call. Adelia, go ahead, you're unmuted.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Adelia Caravaca. I'm a member of WILPF in Costa Rica. I'm very impressed with the presentation of Joy. I just want to congratulate her for the good work and the good presentation. It's very informative and very interesting. I just had a small question because I like the way she connected the issue of food security with conflict and with arms, and I like her maybe to delve a little bit more on that, how it is impacting women, if it is mostly in rural areas or is it all around larger areas, and that's one question. And how also is the section there being able to network with women in those areas, if it's possible, or what are the challenges they must have in those armed conflict areas?
Okay, thank you, Adelia, for your question. We've seen preponderance of the violence against women in the rural areas because there women have less access to justice, they have less access to amenities, they don't really have a voice. But we also do have a whole lot of this taking place in the urban areas. And another thing we've witnessed in Nigeria is there is this use of social network, like when they would use arms to rape a woman, then the next thing they'll put it on YouTube, it goes viral. So not only have they sexually exploited her, they've also sent the pictures viral on YouTube as well. So most times we have these women committing suicide. This kind of violence is seen mainly in the urban area. Whereas in the rural areas, what we see is in communities where we have communal conflicts and all that going on, the women are being raped and all that using arms. But then the good news is that we've also seen, like I said, an emergence of a lot of women-focused groups. So women are learning how to network together. Sometimes we have lots of women organizations coming together. And last year we started a loose network called Nigeria's National Women Peace and Security Network. So what we try to do within this network is to create visibility for the work these organizations are doing and to network women organizations both at the rural area and the urban area with this very focused organization depending on their area of work. So for chance, we have people that are strictly working on violence against women. We have those that are working on access to justice for women. We link all of them up. So we did this network with like how where women can come in and find very access to diverse help and diverse support.
Great. Thanks, Joy. Thanks, Adelia. So now I'll give the floor to Carlin Hambuba, and after that, Helen, and after that, I have a written question from Nagako. So, Carlin, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. I also want to thank Joy for that very stimulating and informative presentation which she made. However, I do have a few questions for Joy. Actually, it's just one question. In your presentation, Joy, you alluded to the fact that Nigeria has a national action plan on peace and security. Yeah. So I just wanted to find out to what extent are the women involved in implementing this national action plan on peace and security. And then I'm particularly interested in this question, especially considering the current situation in Nigeria of conflict, which is being perpetrated by some terrorists and also the Boko Haram. So I'd like to know how the women of Nigeria are involved in the National Action Plan on Peace and Security in Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. In the process leading up to the launch of National Action Plan, like I said during my presentation, the National Action Plan was driven by the government, which means that it has a plus and minus. The plus is that we didn't really need to lobby so hard to have the National Action Plan on 1425. But the minus is that there was not a broad representation of women voice or diverse women's voice carried along in the National Action Plan. But be that as it may, is not really very peculiar to Nigeria's National Action Plan because we've seen that across many National Action Plan. And it was the National Action Plan was launched last year. We're still watching for the implementation because the implementation process by the lead agency hasn't been very clear. There's still a whole lot of disconnect at the federal, state level, and community level. So what we have done, especially at the National Women, Peace and Security Network, is to form up a program of implementation process, which we're trying to run on ground with our member organizations. And that is creating awareness, because so many people don't even know that this National Action Plan exists. So there's a whole lot of issues with National Action Plan. And that's one of the issues you get when the government drives it. And you're very right. It's very critical for us in Nigeria right now, especially with the ongoing conflict we have in the northern part of Nigeria. And also considering that we're going into our general elections next year, and there's a whole lot of pre-election violence that has been seen in the recent past. So this, first of all, the good thing is that this document exists. It is something we can now use to work, especially in this pre-campaign and pre-election period. So like I said, the Women's Network, we've gotten ourselves together, but there's a lot of restrictions and restriction because of availability of funds. But be that as it may, I think we'll see a whole lot coming out of it this year. And the good thing is the National Action Plan will be coming up for review next year. So that would give us opportunity to have greater input into what the National Action Plan would look like next during the review.
All right. Thank you, Carlin. So now I'll give the floor to Helen. Helen, you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you, Emma. Actually, the previous speaker has asked the question I was going to ask. So thank you, Joy, for a very interesting presentation. But I was just wondering how supportive the government was in helping you work with them towards the implementation of the National Action Plan.
We don't receive any sort of financial support from the government. So what we just work, we try to because they are the lead agency we have a lead agency called the Ministry of Women Affairs, and these are the ones that we actually work directly with on issues concerning women, peace and security agenda, because they are the ones that have been given the role of implementation. So what we do is that when we get our own funding or we have our programs, we consult with them, and then we try to see what programs they have, and then marry ours into theirs. But aside that, we haven't received funding from them. We haven't received much support from them in that area, because they would also say they have limitations as well, that women's issues are not prioritized and they don't have enough budget in their ministry to run or to implement. So that's one of the issues they raised even during the launch last year, that they don't have enough fund, and and our National Action Plan is not tied to any particular budget. It has no budget tied to it, so that makes it even very tricky to even implement for them.
Yes, I can imagine. All right. Thank you, Helen, for your question. Now I have two questions from that are written. The first is from Nagako and the second is from Sherry, so I will ask those. The first from Nagako, it's a little hard to read, but I'll try to rephrase. I think Nagako is asking about if there's any focus on men in Nigeria and men's behavior rather than just women and women empowerment. Is anybody asking the men why they are behaving this way and what work is being done to make them understand that peace is necessary for both men and women? Yes, so to you, Joy.
Yes, there's a lot of work being done in engaging with men. I would say engaging with them responsibly. We have a lot of other organizations that are really focused on engagement with men. But for us, we've done our programs which hasn't been very intensive or very broad to engage with men. Like the last year, we had some roundtables. We had some workshops for men in the community. Because after speaking to our women on the ground, most of them raised these issues as well. So we had what we call stakeholders meetings with them. We had roundtable talks with them, trying to understand where they're coming from, and trying to also explain to them the essence of respecting women, upholding their rights, and having them participate at the community level as well. So there's a new focus actually. We're trying to see if this could form part of our broader work in future. And we also have other organizations working on this, and this is their main line of focus. Yes, there's a lot in that area.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nagako, for that question. Then I have one from Sherry, and then Ellen, and then Carlin again. So first, Sherry, thanks you for the excellent presentation and information. And then she asks if WILPF Nigeria liaises with the Crisis Center for Rape Victims at LASUTH and with Partnership for Justice. If so, how? What is your role? If not, why? So she's asking if you are working together with the Crisis Center for Rape Victims at LASUTH and with Partnership for Justice.
No, WILPF Nigeria is not working with the two organizations you mentioned, but we have other organizations that we've partnered with and we're working with, like African Alliance, which is based in Lagos. We also have KIND, whose also primary work is on rape victims and also on providing access to justice. We also partner with WIPNET, Women in Peace Building Network, whose also terms of reference are also this. So we also have other organizations that have this, that we partner with, who are working in these core areas. And that's why during my presentation I said, not just WILPF Nigeria, but we have sister organizations that we're in close partnership with. And in the Women, Peace and Security Network, I talked about that we started last year, which is being hosted by NSRP. It's also, we have diverse women organizations with diverse thematic areas of working with whom we partner with as well. So, but those two, no, we're not working with them.
All right. Then we have another written question from Ellen Liss from WILPF Sweden. Also, just to point out for anybody else, if you're unsure how the hand works, you can also just type your question in the question bar below. Ellen asks, and maybe it's a very relevant question for this webinar because I think we have participants from literally all around the world. Ellen asks, how do international or foreign powers impact the situation in Nigeria and the region in a negative or positive way? What changes in this regard do you wish for?
I would say, for me, international policies, international work impacts in the region, impacts Nigeria in diverse ways. And being a member of an international organization, we found it very helpful to have issues that we want to be heard at the international platform being raised by our UN New York office and sometimes being raised by a secretariat. For instance, when Nigeria came up for Universal Periodic Review for the human rights last year, and before that, our Geneva office organized a pre-session for us, which was able to meet with international players and states, delegates, discuss with them issues of concern for us in Nigeria, which at the end of the day, we had almost all the issues of concern and recommendations we had raised to the Nigerian government, and which they assented to most of them. So for us, it's a very good thing. So the negative aspect, I wouldn't really say there's much of a negative aspect because when we talk about the Women, Peace and Security agenda, it's been affected in diverse ways, and there are best practices we can learn from across. I wouldn't say there's actually any negative thing, even though I talked about Pan-Africanism when I was giving my presentation. But I've not seen, I can't say this is a negative thing we've seen so far, because it has actually provided a platform for us to raise issues of concern. It helps our work more than it distracts us from the work we're doing on ground. So for me, international arena is a good voice, because when you're living in a country whereby you don't have complete access or control to justice, you have a lot of corruption going on and wanton abuse of human rights, then having access to an international platform where you could raise your concerns, where they could put pressure on the government, becomes a very big advantage and a plus.
Great. I hope that answers your question, Ellen. Then one more hand from Carlin again. Carlin, I'm giving you the floor now. Go ahead.
Mine is not a question for now. I just want to make a comment
Go
based
ahead.
on Joy's Hello, can you get me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. I was saying it's not a question, but rather a comment. Based on what Joy has explained, I just want to maybe just to add on. I think for me, what is critical and crucial for the African woman in issues of discussions around disarmament is that it is critical for the African woman to ensure that they engage in these discussions around disarmament, because I know there are initiatives that are aimed at, promoting issues of disarmament, demobilization, and also reintegration. So the African woman needs to find their space in those discussions. Like I know in February 2012, the African Union Commission, through their Peace and Security Department, I think they did have a conference to discuss issues of disarmament and demobilization, where they were engaging African countries to see how they can work together to find ways of administering these disarmaments and demobilizations. And what is critical for me is that the woman needs to find their space and be in those discussions, because without the women being in those discussions, it will be very, very difficult for the woman's voice to be heard at such forums. And yet, these are important forums that make the decisions. Once the African Union meet and they make decisions, these are the decisions that are being implemented in our countries. So we need to find our space in those spaces. Thank you.
Joy, would you like to comment on Carlin?
Yeah, I'm in full support of what she says, because what she said makes a whole lot of sense, and it's very important that we find our space and our voice. And I know in the African Union we have there's a group that lobbies the African Union, which is called the GMAC, Gender is Our Campaign. It has become a very powerful catalyst for creating space for African women to have their voices heard, and also to lobby the state governments to implement issues of women, peace and security and other thematic issues in the region. And it's very critical that as women and as African women and feminists, we engage as part of the space for more women to have their voices heard, and also to create a platform for women to network from across the African region as well, so that we can build a formidable space, a formidable team where women can air their voice, have their voices heard. But in so doing, we also have to realize that there's a whole lot of limitations for the African women in engaging in these discussions. And that was the issue of bread and butter I talked about during my presentation. Because we really need to address the issue of poverty, of economic independence of the African woman. When we do that, then the African woman will be more confident and will be able to leverage on these spaces that are being created and also partake in discussions. But be that as it may, I fully agree with her that we need to have our own space and to engage in the processes as well.
All right. Then we have a question from Penelope Wells in Scotland. She's written the question, so I will read it. It's a little long, but thank goodness we're ahead of schedule, so we have time. I'll just read it, so bear with me. It says, hi, I run EWEPP, Enabling Women to Engage in Peace Processes, a small charity in Scotland. I had a letter from Justine Greening, Secretary of State, saying they were hoping to get standalone gender goals for women to be included in peace processes, October last year. But during talks in Geneva to discuss Millennium Development Goals 2015, the issue was not passed as a standalone gender goal. Does anybody know why? Has anybody else heard of this standalone gender goal of women in power? We think that this idea is not a separate goal. Women just get lost in the small print of other agreements. And the last question is, should we have quotas? So her question is about how relevant other people think this standalone gender goal of women involved in peace processes is. So Joy, or if anybody else wants to comment on it, please let us know. Joy?
Yeah. For me, I would always prefer an integrated approach to the women, peace and security agenda, to having women concerns spread, because like you said when you were making the introduction, it's very important to integrate it, because the problem we're seeing is that when you have the stand-alone goals, people don't tend to see it from a holistic point of view. They don't tend to see the comprehensive impact of this. It's like this is the women's thing. But if we realize that women are human beings, and we're talking about human beings, but a particular gender, women, but we shouldn't just close the space. And that's my own opinion. I don't think we should close it. I think we should expand the space, integrate it to every issue, because there's a gender dimension to every issue. But we shouldn't just close the space and have a standalone discussion. I think we should incorporate it into the broader picture, and we should also expand it as much as possible, even though it also has no risk in doing that. But weighing the risks and advantages, I think it's better to integrate it into other issues within a human rights framework. That would give us something tangible to work with.
All right. That was the last question I had. So everybody, this is your last chance to raise your hand or to write a question. Otherwise, we will go to closing. I'm not seeing any hands, I think. No. All right. So then I will give the floor to Barbara to close this webinar and to talk a little about the next upcoming webinar in the series. I'd just like to take this chance to, for me at least, thank Joy so much for giving this webinar and for everybody for coming. So thanks everybody, and hopefully till next time. Barbara, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for being with us. And once again, our apologies for the last minute time change, and thank you for your flexibility. And most of all, thank you for the very good discussions we had in the end. And if I could ask you, Emma, to go to the slide with the picture.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, we couldn't see Joy today while she was speaking. And just to mention that it's her just in the middle of the picture. So thank you very much, Joy, for the, yes, it's exactly right. So thank you very much, Joy, for your lecture. As other participants mentioned, it was very informative and very interesting. And thank you for finding time for it, because we know that you have an extremely tight schedule and that you are flying today from Ghana to Nigeria. And just to close, I would like to invite you to our next webinar that will be held in April. And it will be a joint webinar of the WILPF Academic Network and the Anniversary Group on History. We will address women's struggles to achieve peace since 1915. So I hope many of you will be able to join. So once again, thank you, and feel free to contact us. So yes, now you have like the contact slide, so feel free just to write us an email if you have any questions or suggestions. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. I'll
Thank you. Bye.
mute everything now. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.